Welcome to Popcorn Psychology, the podcast where we watch blockbuster movies and psychoanalyze them. My name is Brittany Brownfield, and I'm a child therapist, and I'm joined by...
Ben Stover, individual therapist.
Hannah Espinoza, marriage and family therapist.
We're all licensed clinical professional counselors, also known as therapists, who practice out of Chicago. Even though we are licensed mental health professionals, this podcast is purely for entertainment purposes and to fulfill our love of dissecting pop culture in all forms.
Please remember that even though we are all licensed therapists, we aren't your therapist.
If you are struggling with mental health symptoms, please find a local mental health provider.
Hello, we are talking about Jumanji today. We will be discussing the four main characters and their experiences with trauma, and as always, treatment and final thoughts. Jumanji is a story based on a supernatural board game that releases jungle-based hazards on its players with every turn they take. And first, we're going to start talking about Alan.
Yeah, so in the movie, we're first introduced to the character of Alan Parrish in 1969. And I think something we're supposed to pick up right away with Alan is he's a pretty lonely kid.
Absolutely.
Not just lonely at school, and that he seems like he's pretty isolated and bullied, but also the movie makes a point in the very beginning of showing how alone he is in that house. Like a very poignant shot in the very beginning of the movie to establish his life is him eating dinner at that big table in that big room in that big house by himself.
Yeah.
Like, this is a kid who gets beat up by the other kids, goes to his dad's work to hang out with what seems like his only friend, an adult man that works for his dad. And then he goes home and eats dinner by himself, not even with his parents.
Who are busy working the political scene and not necessarily paying too much attention to him as they are secretly preparing to send him off to boarding school at a school run or is it named after his ancestors?
His dad, the
Parish Hall.
The main dormitory is named after his father, so he makes a point of, I'll be living in a building with my name on it.
No, it says his grandfather's is...
Yeah, well, he says with my name on it, and his dad goes, your grandfather's name.
Right. You just said his dad. That's why I'm like, huh?
Yeah.
Right. But yeah, which he makes the astute point that I'm getting beat up by kids now because subtext, my family's company employs a significantly large portion of the town, so people resent me. Now I'm going to go to a school that's named after me, and you think that's going to make it better?
Yeah.
I thought that was a really good point by a very lonely, sad kid.
Yeah. Because I don't even get a sense, like, when the movie starts and he's getting bullied by the other kids, you don't really get, like, a reason for why he's being bullied that day. It seems like he's someone that just is the kid that gets bullied by the other kids in town.
It seems like he was getting bullied for being friends with Sarah. That the other kids didn't want him to be around her, particularly the kid who was... Billy, who was either dating her or trying to.
Mm-hmm. It's her boyfriend.
Yeah. That she didn't... Or he wanted him to be away because he was uncomfortable with their friendships. Because it seems like Sarah's the only person who's friends with him besides David Allen Greer's character.
Carl.
Yeah, that is Carl. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the only people that are actually substantially nice to him and listen to him. Because it's clear that him and Sarah have a friendship that kind of... Maybe it operates a little bit in secret, that they've been friends since they were little kids, and even though he's kind of the social outcast, she does still come over to hang out and talk with him. But it doesn't seem like she makes that especially known.
Well, she comes over to play when they end up playing the game because she drops off his bike because her boyfriend stole it from him. And so it does make me wonder how much they actually hang out, because it did seem like she was doing more of like a Good Samaritan thing in the beginning of like, my boyfriend, I get that he's a dick. You know what I mean?
I also felt like they were childhood friends though too. Like maybe she lives close and that's why she could bring his bike home because she was also coming home. I don't know.
They said they were friends. They talked about that.
Okay.
That they used to hang out more and like,
Oh, I'm sorry. That's right.
so there's an established relationship from being small children that we all know tends to start to change around that middle school time where
Yeah, 6th grade is the age they're in, which
Yeah.
is a horrible age
It's an intense one. That's for goddamn sure.
in terms of like social development.
Yeah.
I mean, if you ask people, if you could go back to any age you've ever been, literally no one has ever said any of the ages between 11 to 13. Not one time ever.
Yeah, middle school's pretty bad. I would say it's worse than high school
Yeah.
in a lot of ways.
I would say so too.
A lot of people will say, oh, I'd love to do high school again, knowing what I know
Ew.
now.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, some people are Uncle Rico and they're stuck there, like,
Yeah.
you know, or they're Al Bundy talking about, you know, their 4 touchdowns they threw.
Ew, yeah.
But nobody wants to go back to junior high. And it's because things like this, you have painful things where your friend groups start to transition and people who may have been friends or close friends or family friends, whatever, start to drift away as they find their own social group, their own things, and you don't all necessarily blend anymore. And it's hard. And I think that's
It
what
also-
we're seeing between these two.
It also feels kind of wild that he gets the shit beat out of him out in public during the day and nobody does anything about it.
I mean, it's the late 60s.
Yeah. Oh, I guess that's true.
Yeah. I feel like
Look, I don't even know if in the 90s they would have done anything, to be honest.
They would not.
Yeah. So, but
I feel like it's very
but either
kids
way,
being kids. Like,
Yeah.
unless they were making like a loud ruckus that would bother the adults.
Yeah.
Or if they're doing it in front of like a business, maybe they would have said scram.
for sure.
But I don't think they would have stepped in to defend Alan.
Yeah.
Especially like, who knows if you like zoom out to the culture of the town.
Yeah.
Who knows what that even looks like in terms of like the parishes being these like richy rich family that like that employs all of the other people in town.
Absolutely.
A lot of people in town, like they could be like there's a weird reverence toward the family, as same as there could be also a like, look at that fucking parish kid, he's a rich kid, you know, like
Yeah.
he'll be fine kind of thing.
Well, even his
or like
own,
resentment, I guess.
his own dad tells him to go out and face his bully, that you can't hide forever.
Yeah.
That 1000% would have been said in the 90s, so I assume it was only worse in the 60s. Go face your own battles, go fight your own fight. Stop being a little bitch, like would have been essentially the message that people would have given, and not realizing the harm that can do. Like, go punch
Yeah.
the bully in the nose. You want him to stop? Punch him in the nose.
Yeah, like as if every kid can do that. Like Alan's the kind of kid that he would just get the shit kicked out of him again. And also this assumption that every kid wants to have to fight that hard for peace in their lives. You know, also this idea that a kid like Alan or any kid wants to be aggressive like that. And they should be, and that they're going to get some empowerment out of it,
Yeah.
you know?
Right, but that's, you know, looking at what would have been in the 60s, or even when, like, speaking as a child that grew up in the 90s and most certainly got this message, was a thing.
Oh, for sure. I know it was a thing.
But it's, you know, it's important to recognize, looking back on this now, even a movie that's now almost 30 years old, which we won't be saying that again. Don't look at me like that. It's 29 years old.
Yeah.
Newsflash. But looking at how different things were, even in the 90s, how different they were in the 60s, and what they're trying to show of like, oh, adults didn't do anything to protect kids. And then in the 90s, we were slowly embracing we probably shouldn't let kids beat the shit out of each other.
Yeah, it's part of that whole like almost like victim blaming mentality of if you're getting bullied, it's your responsibility to rise above it and to overpower the situation, instead of someone approaching those bullies and being like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Leave him alone. Or at least being more curious about like what's going on here where this situation keeps happening,
Yeah.
and making it the bullied kid's fault, the victimized kid's fault of why can't they stop this from happening to them, that they're responsible for it not happening repeatedly. And you know that it's something that his parents are really aware of, right? Because when he goes home and his face is all bloodied up, his mom says, oh, not again. So they do make it very clear in the movie, in the beginning, that his parents, or at least his mom, is very well aware that he gets his shit rocked regularly by the other kids in town. And he's not trying to hide it from his parents either. I mean, it's hard to hide when you have like a busted lip and a black eye.
Right. And then last I checked, getting bodily injuries does in fact qualify for that T word we use so often.
Trauma?
What?
I believe you're talking about trauma.
Yes.
Me?
Never.
On this show? What?
Yeah.
Yeah. Having profound powerlessness and feelings that you're out of control and you can't stop the bad things that are happening to you absolutely qualifies. And we are introduced right at the beginning of this movie to all of the ways at which this kid is feeling victimized and helpless and out of control of his own life.
Yeah, and then his parents think they're doing him a favor by saying, we're sending you to boarding school in like 3 days.
Yeah, there's no discussion. They just pulled it on him. And also it feels like is a punishment.
Even though they frame it as a reward.
Yeah.
It's not like it was going to happen no matter what. So
Yeah.
the parents were either going to frame it as a reward or a punishment, depending on, I guess, what was happening with the kid that day.
It was clear. I mean, they knew. And who wouldn't send their kid to a school that's named after their family? I mean, I assume Alan also knew this day was coming.
Yeah, even though he does seem shocked.
He does seem shocked.
Which is kind of silly when you think about it, because families like that, where they generationally send their kids somewhere, yeah, it is something you learn to expect. Like when I watch The Crown, you know, the real world examples of this, where like there is this expectation everyone's going to go to these very specific schools.
Absolutely.
At certain ages.
Absolutely.
Be sent away.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm assuming Alan knew that. I think maybe the surprise was coming that he didn't know it would be Monday.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, and also, too, honestly, I think maybe Alan could thrive going away to school somewhere, but not to a place that's just going to replicate the same, like, sociocultural issues he's having at home, which we pointed out earlier, right? Of, like, you're just going to put me somewhere else where I am in this weird category above all the other kids.
Absolutely.
And you see that become his character arc. That's what he has to deal with and face as he grows. That Alan must overcome this sense of being abandoned, being lonely, being scared, being weak. Mm-hmm. That's his journey.
Yeah, and this idea that I think people like his dad, very old school mentality, this idea that it'll toughen you up in a way that's good for you. Whereas as we see when the movie progresses and he gets sucked into a game and is there for 20 some years, that even though it makes him tougher in these very specific ways, it doesn't heal him. You know what I mean? He doesn't become like necessarily like a well-rounded, strong person because of it. And I think, I don't know, sometimes it's the way I think about it, and I'm sure this isn't going to be a shocker to hear, is the way that we will sometimes give meaning to trauma and to bad experiences to try to make them feel worthwhile and have value. This idea we've talked about in recent episodes, I think, of instead of being able to just wrap our heads around the fact that sometimes bad things happen to us and we don't deserve it and it just is what it is.
Yeah.
People will do, like, and this is something that I think gets passed on a lot generationally, is this idea of like, that's good for you and it was good for me and it was good for your grandpa to go through these bad experiences, these isolating experiences, these tough experiences, because it made me who I am today. And I have to believe that that was good. So now I'm passing that idea down to you. And you better get on board with it, because you can't crumble my idea of my story.
Correct. And if you do, I'm going to crush that out of you. Like it was crushed out of me, because that's how I learned to conquer the world. Mm-hmm. And that's how I, as a parent, can teach you to survive the world I know is coming, that you don't know yet, but I do. And I know better than you.
Because they make a point in the movie, too, of naming that his dad isn't very affectionate either. Like, it's not just a dad who isn't around, like, who's just busy.
Right.
But also a dad who, like, barely hugs me. Like, he makes a point of talking about how cold and removed his dad is as well.
And then, of course, symbolically, that's represented by the Hunter character being his dad.
Oh,
That
yeah.
pursues him aggressively throughout the film. So that, even though it's a character that interacts with other characters, therefore is a real character, symbolically it being his dad, seems like it was a little more than just out of convenience of not having to hire another actor.
Well, that was kind of, I was telling Hannah, that was sort of a trope of movies of this time period. Like, one of my favorite movies growing up was Little Princess, and the dad in that also plays the main protagonist in the story she tells her friends when she's in an orphanage. In the movie Pan, Jason Isaacs plays both the dad and also Captain Hook. Like, I feel like there was a thing in this time period where I feel like the writers were thinking they were really doing something psychologically by making the dad characters also play different roles in the story. Like a little, Freudian stuff right there.
Right. Which, of course, they were.
Yeah.
And I had not thought about Little Princess for so long, and
It's one of my favorites of all time.
so good. It's so good. I don't remember whether it was this movie or something else that made me think of that, but then maybe it was this because it came up recently. I was like, what was that movie that was like Secret Garden, but it wasn't Secret Garden?
Yeah, those were like a twofer. They came out around the same time by the same author, and they're in the same place in my brain, and we will definitely do one or both of them on this podcast at some point because they both got good dark themes to them.
And with as much as we're being asked about Game of Thrones, Liam Cunningham was the dad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I knew I had seen him somewhere when he came on Game of Thrones, and I could not figure it out.
Yes, he's the dad in Little Princess.
And now that we're several years past Game of Thrones, realizing that's where it is was very satisfying.
Yes.
Anyway, so we see Alan go through this journey of being challenged. Like, we set the scene of where he's at. Where does he go?
A Jumanji.
Jumanji.
Yeah, so then we experience this person who has spent 20-some years in hell.
Yes.
Pretty much. Like, the idea of someone at the age of 12 with limited life experience, limited life skills. I mean, also considering what socioeconomic status he comes from. Who knows what even, like, practical life skills he had? He probably didn't clean anything himself. Nothing like that. They probably had servants, right? So I was thinking like a kid that probably doesn't have to do much for himself to then being in this situation where it's both terrifying, you have no control, you're surrounded by the wildest versions of jungle creatures, and you have to figure out how to take care of yourself. And you just have to keep doing that for 2 decades. It would break you. And you can see that. I like when he comes back, he is not this like normal version of himself. He's a jungle man.
Yeah, he's very wild and clearly damaged and stuck in a survival mode. He comes out of it a little too quick, frankly, but it's a kids' movie, so it didn't have to be real.
Well, yeah, like everything in this
Definitely.
movie probably takes place over the course of... It never turns dark out. So, from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m.?
Possibly, because the aunt is gone, like just gone for the day at work or something, and she gets back. So yeah, I feel like this is like maybe one day.
Yeah, it's
It's
just
all one day. Yeah,
Right.
that's what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's definitely like 8 a.m. to 4:30 maybe, because the aunt's planning to be home by, we'll just say 6.
Yeah, yeah.
So he, within the course of what, like 15 minutes, between a good shave and an outfit change,
And a
he has
shower.
he's a shower. He's come back to being part of a civilized society.
And as the story goes on, we learn a little bit more about what he's had to learn to survive from being what was clearly a, we'll say, early puberty phase for him. It looked like the actor that was playing him, didn't have a whole lot of adult man features just yet.
Well, yeah, and he's so much shorter than the girl character, which I really liked.
Yeah, me too.
That was a good touch.
Yeah. Robin Williams being this like mass of hair that he was, like that's,
Yeah.
clear that he has undergone quite a lot of life in a jungle, and realizing the terrors that he's faced, that he's had to learn how to adapt with his little turtle shell helmet, and understanding how to fight lions, which don't live in jungles, and
Whatever was in the game was in the jungle, right?
right, everything that he had to survive, knowing that this boy somehow, without the guidance of any adults, figured out what to do with everything that he faced in that game. Thinking about that as a therapist now and wondering, like, good God, there's no way he would have come back at all. He would have been lion lunch. But had he come back, I don't think there would have been much chance he was that adaptive.
I think you'd be experiencing someone who was having consistent psychotic features, possibly even coming out of that kind of trauma, coming back into the world in that way that he did. Also, the realization that he comes to, that he has to come to immediately, which is that also that it's a completely different time, and his family is dead. Like, there's the fact that the character jumps through those experiences so quickly
right
in the movie is so absolutely unrealistic. And again, it's a kid's movie. We get that. And that is impossible.
Well, yeah, it's the idea that he wouldn't be immediately hospitalized. I feel like in a more grounded version of this movie, he would run out of the house, be acting a mess, like viewing everything and everyone as a threat.
Well, even how...
Yeah, feral.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes me think of how he jumped onto the police car. Right? Where, like, in movies like this, where somebody comes out of... like a dream state or something, they run out into the street and they get hit by a car, and instead he jumps on top of the car. Right? Like, that's a part of him responding to something as a threat, even though that's not what the intention was with the car.
Well, and also what makes me curious about his mental state, and maybe even how he... where we're going with this is so funny. How he perceived time in Jumanji. Is that he comes back to the present time or the real world, assuming that, like, he almost acts like no time has passed. Like his parents were just out to dinner still.
Yes.
Like he's like, my dad must be down at the factory. Like he's acting as if he's been gone for like a month in terms of where he thinks time is. Which I get, like, you probably don't have no sense of time where he was the way that we do, because they probably didn't have like clocks and calendars and stuff. But to act as if so much time hadn't passed, it makes me curious how he was even like perceiving time psychologically, or how time even passes in Jumanji, because it does seem like he was kind of stuck too in some ways.
Well, he was developmentally stuck. He knew he knew it was 26 years, but when the simultaneous difference between what he'd be perceiving and knowing logically versus what the feeling side of his brain would be telling him to keep him alive, like where his hopes would be, that wouldn't have grown because he didn't have another adult besides the hunter, who he clearly knew, to interact with, that we know of, for 26 years. As he went through all those moments of life and survival and jungle shit, he would have not had a single adult to challenge any of his childlike thoughts with. Nobody would have broken it down for him as he got older, like happens for most of us, where somebody, some adult, an older sibling, somebody pulls you aside and goes, hey buddy, so life's real life is rough out here. Shit happens, people die. Nobody had those conversations with him, and he didn't watch people age, and he didn't have a mirror. He may have seen himself in water, but I don't know that the child part inside of him that left the real world and went into Jumanji, that didn't have an opportunity to grow. So as he's investing hope, as he finally gets that wish, he would have been dissociated like that. And pulled back in to, oh my God, I'm home. Everything I've ever wanted is back.
And assuming it would be kind of right where it was when he left it.
Right. Which you have no reason to believe otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, and also you get sucked into a game you played. I guess all bets are off in terms of what could be possible.
Well, and I was even thinking about the propensity to give up hope while he was in the game, It's interesting. I mean, like, I think it makes sense because he's just trying to survive, and that's all that he can focus on, and that's all that he can do. But it really makes me wonder if it was just like a nonstop nightmare that he was in the whole time.
Yeah.
Almost.
I was thinking about this as I was talking with my wife about doing this movie of whether I would say he'd even qualify for PTSD yet. And I think the answer I'd come to is no. Because he literally, as we're watching this film, in the middle of it, just gets ejected from the game, but he's still in the game.
Yeah, the game follows him out pretty much.
Yep.
So we don't, until the very end, which we'll talk about that later.
Yep.
But we don't see him out of threat. So he's still in survival mode. It can't be a post-traumatic experience because he's still in one that hasn't stopped.
That's a good point. He's very much going. You know, we got to do this. We got to change. We got to get over here. We got to get the game. We got to find Sarah. We got to get her to play the game. Like, he is in that mode still, just trying to get one foot in front of the other to get to the end of this.
Correct. So I think it makes sense that we see two different, like, realities have to hardcore collide when he first gets out of the game, that he's coming back into his house, but it's in complete disarray, and he's not even perceiving that. That house has been abandoned for 20 years. Mm-hmm. That he's just, it's my house. He's probably not accurately even able to rely on his senses at that point because he's just running through seeing all his stuff and everything's there, and he's gotten his wish to be back. He'd have no reason to assume that it would be 26 years later outside of the game like it was inside of the game.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and also as we're talking about like dissociating and stuff like that, how that screws with your concept of time, and how if you're in that much survival mode in Jumanji, the jungle, you probably aren't perceiving time or the passage of time in a way that feels as fully realized as when you're present.
Correct. And I think the same thing happens to anybody that leaves home for a while. The idea you have of home, even going to college, you still think things are going to be the same when you come back after the end of the semester or whatever frequency you did, and you don't realize that life goes on without you. And Alan, being a 12-year-old kid, wouldn't yet have the cognitive capacity to overcome the egocentrism to understand that life would have gone on without him, and people would have assumed that he was dead.
Yeah. It is an interesting little kind of side throwaway stuff, how they talk about how basically everyone thinks his dad murdered him and chopped his body. That's like the town rumor.
Right.
Yeah. It doesn't sound like his dad like went to jail or anything, but it sounds like that's maybe more the lore, the urban legend in their town, is that the parish boy got killed by his dad when he went quote unquote missing.
And let alone having to digest that everything that he knew was gone, to the point that there's a homeless man who is the only other person that shows him kindness immediately.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Offers him clothes, like, dude, you're going to freeze. That tells him the truth, which is that your dad kept looking for you.
I don't like, though, that he goes, yeah, your parents are over there. Say your parents' graves are over there. Don't make it sound like they're hanging out in the park.
I wondered if Alan knew where that was already. So, like, when he said where they were, if he already knew that the cemetery was there. But I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with your point, and that's something that in the critical incident training and peer support training that I've gone through working with first responders, one of the things that they make sure you know is hit the hard truth immediately. Don't let people wait. Don't leave them wait. Like, listen, so-and-so died.
Yep. Like, don't mislead them.
Don't mislead them. Don't let them wonder. Don't try to shy away from the reaction. Just tell them the fucking truth right now. That's one of the things that people struggle with, of like, how do we handle it? We don't want to tell them yet or whatever. Like, no, tell them now, right now, because nothing that you say will even matter anyway.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
They're not listening for anything except that. So tell them what they need to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I agree with that point, that telling him, oh, they're over on Front Street or whatever.
I was like, come on. Don't make it sound like they're hanging out.
Or like they live on a street, or they just moved someplace else, which is what it very much feels like, his energy that he's giving to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which, was narratively interesting, but not, not
Kind.
fair.
Yeah.
Well, just not thoughtful.
Yeah.
I think one thing I also wanted to just us talk about further is this idea of, like this being a man thing that kind of resonates through the movie. It seems like that's the thing because of this Arrested Development component. Like these are the last messages that Alan gets about the world kind of and who he needs to be and how to be a man, right? Mm-hmm. So then he gets sucked into this game where then unfortunately that gets proven right in the sense that you have to face things that you're scared of. You have to fight. And then the only other person, human, he encounters in the game is a hunter that looks like his dad. I wonder if the game made him look like his dad to fuck with him.
Probably.
Oof.
That's mean.
And
This game is not nice.
It definitely is not
and
nice.
he's saying the things that his dad, it's like they did like pull from his psyche and create a person that looks like his dad who is a uber version of that concept. Like he calls him a coward. He's like, come and face me, you coward. Like just throwing that narrative in his face. So also, how could that not result in a person who thinks that, who like stays in almost like perpetual fight and then thinks that that's the correct way to be because that's the messaging he got before, during, and probably after too.
Yep. And had to constantly square with what he was and was not, and never had any other opinion of another human to balance it off for 26 years. That does deep damage to people.
And just the loneliness of that as well, of how much we as human beings need human connection. And then the only other human that we know of that he's encountering in this hellscape is this guy who is the most traumatizing version of his dad.
Yeah.
Like, I think going back to like the unrealistic parts of this movie, of course, him coming back and being as socially adept as he is, being able to even be chill enough with the kids, even though he's like irritable, which is very understandable. I do like that version of his presentation, that he is on edge. He is not like George of the Jungle. He's not fun and like, ooh, like he is kind of a prick, and he earns it. I get why he's a prick, and I kind of like that Robin Williams went with that edgier, more irritable presentation.
And I just realized that we said the house is all dilapidated, but it was. I forgot they fixed it up before he...
Yeah, their aunt, over the course of an afternoon, a school day, fixed up that whole house and fully furnished it.
Yeah.
Right. But watching him come back and somehow competently cut his hair and shave was... movie magic, but also absolutely that child part trying to actualize and present, now that he had a mirror in a way to face it in a way that was less disturbing and distressing immediately upon visual stimuli being perceived. That matters to understand that if that's the part that's in control, that's the part that's going to want to look like it's in control and present outwardly.
The shaving part, what actually that made me think of is how when we've gone through something traumatic or chronically traumatic like he has, how you can gain all of these survival skills that are very unique and impressive, and you could almost argue like post-traumatic growth-esque, but then simultaneously you don't know how to do activities of daily living kind of stuff. And they don't know how to do like basic things. Like him not knowing how to shave just felt like that struck me as realistic to people I've worked with in real life who have like survived and have a lot of like street smart survival skill stuff, but there's like very basic things that they just never learned how to do because no one took the time to teach them or was able to teach them, or they were never in an environment where someone thought to teach them that. And how he's going to have a lot of those post this experience. Like if we cut off the corrective ending, like let's say they just had to keep going
right
when the game ends, he's someone that would probably need a lot of social skills teaching in these very specific ways that I think we take for granted, knowing when you're raised in a either like community or a family where you learn how to take care of these more like smaller minutia tasks.
Agreed. It wouldn't have been relevant. Those things,
Right.
those things are negligible when your survival's on the table. When you put that into scale of, I could actually get eaten by a lion or run over by a rhino, which also doesn't live in the jungle, or an African elephant, which maybe, but Indian elephants live in the jungle. But looking at the idea of the amount of danger, the basic survival skills and things, they wouldn't be relevant. And looking at the way Robin facially and bodily acted through those moments of seeing the sadness and also the weird combination of competence against immense danger, but none against society. How that man only got one Oscar in his career baffles me.
And it's very also similar to, if you think about Shawshank Redemption, like people who spend a lot of their lives in an institution of some sort, like prison, where you're just trying to survive. You figured out the lay of the land. You're very good at this kind of world. And then you have to go back to, or go into the quote unquote regular world, right? I think we see that with like Morgan Freeman's character. And just how much we forget is a learned behaviors that if you've been outside of quote unquote regular life, you either never learn or you forget. And that stuff can feel really hard to ask for help about, because it can feel really embarrassing to admit to other people, I don't know how to do these very basic things.
I think he'd present more like the girl from Us. His prison has its own human ecosystem. He had no human. I would be surprised if he remembered how to speak.
I thought the same thing. I was thinking the same thing, because after, and also how easily he drops, and again, this is just a part of the movie, I'm sure, but how easily he drops into communicating with the monkeys, communicating with the other animals, like making loud noises and doing different grunts and different kind of
animal sounds.
Animal sounds, I guess, is the best way to say
like defensive noises.
Exactly. And how it would make a lot of sense if he forgot how to speak, because he doesn't have to talk to anybody.
I think realistically, the most likely things he would have done would be attack or flee.
Yeah.
I don't think. I think he would have struggled to come up with the social parts of him that were encoded for a third of his life, and then not reinforced for the next 2/3.
Yeah, and the only person you can have a conversation with, you're running from. I don't think he was sitting down and having tea with the hunter and keeping fresh on his English.
It seems doubtful.
Yeah, I feel like he was, every time I heard him talk, he probably ran. Because that's also a part that I thought was really well acted in the movie, is when he realizes the hunter, when he says he'll make you feel just like a child. That was really well done. And that felt like trauma. You know, like the way that he like curls in on himself as soon as he realizes who's coming. And how scared he seems of that than anything else.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Even though the hunter you'd imagine was quote unquote less scary than like a lion coming at your face, or like giant spiders or rhinos. But that does seem to hit him at a level, because who knows, like the pain and agony of like, I miss people so much. Yeah. And I'm being taunted constantly. By the only person I would like want to be, like the only person available to me is this fucking asshole.
Yeah.
Like that is torture.
Yeah.
To probably long for other people, have one around, and you can't even let them know that you're around because you're in danger.
Yeah.
And let's not forget that person carries an elephant gun. So we've talked about Alan and his journey, rather not quite the ending, but anything more we want to say on Alan?
No.
I think the only other thing I want to say is that I think he does a really good job of acting a little bit like a 12-year-old as an adult when he kind of teases Sarah a little bit. He makes a couple faces that are kind of like little kid faces. And I thought that was a really accurate way to show somebody who is literally Arrested Development.
Yeah, like his dynamic with the kids
Yes.
is more like peers, and he's kind of shitty with them the way that you'd be shitty with a peer.
Yeah.
And then when he tries to be more of a father figure, he immediately starts emulating his dad,
Yes.
which is like when kids play act a version of the adults around them.
Yes.
Like he has a little bit too much insight where he says like, look at me acting like my father. That's very much a 90s movie line.
Absolutely.
But it makes sense that as soon as he's put in that position, he just acts like his dad, like literally just
Yes.
make believes like his dad.
Yeah.
Yep, he sure does. And watching how pervasive that becomes in his behavior is brilliantly acted by Robin Williams, who clearly is taking the direction to act like a kid in a man's body.
Yes.
Well, that's that's Hook, that's Jack. Like so many movies he's done is that.
Almost like it wasn't an accident he got cast in this.
Yeah.
Let's take a break here, and we'll come back and talk about Sarah.
Sarah. Oh, I have a soft spot for Sarah. She makes me sad. I feel like when I watched movies as a kid, she really stuck with me. Because Sarah is, as we've kind of mentioned, she is the friend of Alan who is with him, the only person with him when Alan gets sucked into Jumanji. And I think this movie does a really good job of showing a realistic aftermath for someone put in her position. Someone who at the age of 12 witnesses something truly unexplainable and unbelievable. You know, there is no, I don't know if any sane therapist, psychologist, especially not in the 70s or late 60s, early 70s, would ever corroborate that kind of story the way that she's explaining it. I get the idea that, like, if I was her child therapist, as much as I hate to admit it, like, I think I would also be like, ooh, she must have seen something happen to this kid that was really bad, and her brain made it this to deal with it, to put it into this context of like a child's game. I can understand why she has the narrative she currently has, where she has been to therapy for many years and is on medication, and she just thinks it's a delusion or something she made up, or like a fake memory or something from when she was a kid.
Right. And having something like this show up in a film is difficult because the therapist side of you is going, yeah, people go through stuff that other people don't validate all the time. And
Absolutely.
you really need to let their story be their story. And in some respects, it doesn't matter if it's true or not, if that's the story they need to tell you as a therapist. It's your job to sit with them, listen to it, validate it, and operate within it being real, because it just might be. Or it might be the way their brain encoded something they couldn't explain at an age where they didn't yet have the cognitive or emotional capacity to concretize. But also, like Brittany said, looking at this from the standpoint of knowing how our profession has advanced in the 60s, to expect anybody to say that, not going to happen.
Yeah, she gets slapped with a psychotic disorder of some sort.
Well, and
quickly.
In that time, probably just schizophrenia, because that's what they gave people who had any kind of hallucination, or delusion, or whatever.
Anything that didn't seem rooted in reality.
Yeah,
right. Or simultaneously, or not simultaneously, but alternatively, her parents may have told her, stop saying that, or they're going to put you into these places on these kinds of medications. But she knows what she saw, and it was her reality. And it's a really delicate line to dance, because people's brains are capable of all kinds of things, and at different ages. Like, that could be a very deep discussion we're not going to get it fully into today. It's important to understand that how the human mind chooses to represent stimuli can be really powerful and take many forms that can represent something very real. Like all of us worked with clients with psychoses, and it's very important to understand that their feelings underneath the delusions and paranoia and hallucinations were all very real and rooted in something they went through or were going through that they didn't have the ability to process, or their brain, because of the way their neurotransmitters were operating, obstructed them from having a reasonable way to explain it, and it became something different. But there's always a real emotion underneath it that is important for clinicians to respond to. And they will always, it was a very important part of our training working with those populations. Don't argue with the psychoses. Don't try to tell them it's not real. Validate the feeling underneath it. That must be really scary for you. I don't see the same thing, but I understand that you do, and that you're seeing it right now, and I understand why that's really scary.
I feel like I would say so often, but I believe you.
Right.
But I believe that this is what your experience is like, and I believe that this is, and that sounds really scary, or that must be really scary, and how that is so much more important of helping someone process the way that they feel versus whether or not what they're talking about is real or not.
Well, I think what's hard about the Sarah situation, this is the movie of it all.
Exactly.
Is that this really happened to her.
Correct.
Yes. And the story's so outlandish that who would believe her, right?
Yeah.
And
No
also, I would imagine if I was her, you've witnessed someone you care about, a kid, get sucked into some place that you imagine is really dangerous, and he's still there for as much as you know. So also from her perspective as a kid, the urgency factor of, it's not about whether you believe me or not from a validation perspective. Are we going to save him from Jumanji? So needing the adults to believe her wasn't just a validation thing. Like I think for sometimes our clients, they just want to feel validated when they have psychosis. But for her, it's probably more like a crime has occurred where someone that I care about who's a kid needs help. I can't stop bringing this up until someone believes me, and then I'm sure eventually gives up because of the consequences of continuing to reiterate her story. I think that's what would feel really hard if I was working with her as her therapist, is if she kept repeating that story to me. I could definitely do what you guys are saying, which is this kid went missing. So like, that's real.
Yeah.
You know, she was one of the last people to see Alan perish alive. Right. Mm-hmm. So something happened. Who knows what the police might have, like, it makes me even curious. I'm very curious about her story. Like, did the police interrogate her?
Oh, they did.
I'm sure they did. Right.
They say she did.
Oh, they did say that.
Yeah. Many times.
Yeah. And so she's put in this horrific position where she's trying to tell the truth, and there's urgency to that. And even if I was validating, like, yeah, it's really hard. It must have been really scary when your friend Alan went missing. Like, even if I really dug into the parts that emotionally were true, I could see her being like, I don't need you to say I get it anymore. Are we going to get this kid out of Jumanji or not? So I could see why eventually she just has to give up and just say, I must have been making it up, because it is a wild story, and because I can't get anyone to believe me. So if I want to keep going without breaking my own goddamn brain more than it already has been, I have to relent with the story everyone else is telling.
Well, this is where all of those things are true, and how it would present in reality, which it sort of does. In this movie, obviously, they can't get deep into it because it's a kids' movie, but someone like this, when they encounter a reality they know, that a part of them knows, that nobody else knows, this is how DID forms. Because a part of you knows the fucking truth, and all of the other parts are telling you this is dangerous to your survival. So you don't know it, and you will shut the fuck up, and you will put it in a box, and it will stay there. This is how DID forms. Sarah forms an entire another identity. She doesn't even go by that name.
But to choose to become like a psychic in the house that you grew up in is interesting. I would have a lot of questions about that for her.
I guess I think about it in terms of, especially when you're in a small town, that there might not be anything else that she can do where she can be kind of like secluded and take appointments only and like stuff like that, where she doesn't have to do any kind of training of any kind. And like she's already known as like a weirdo in the town. So it would make a lot of sense that she would kind of lean into something like that.
Yeah, like her house is probably definitely the witch's house.
Yes.
Of the town. Every town I feel like has a house with a bunch of like lore around it. I'm sure the parish house is also one. Both those houses following that incident. But yeah, I mean, I think what we see with her, like we said, is she seems to, after this incident, total social isolation of her own. Like Alan and her, what they have in common as adults, unfortunately, is that this trauma has totally isolated them since it initially happened. They're doing this like parallel story, the two of them, where since that happened, it has pulled them metaphorically and literally from the world of everybody else. Like what's interesting is later in the movie, Alan, because he's stuck in his Arrested Development, brings up her boyfriend, brings up Billy. Like, did you marry Billy? And she doesn't even know who, she can't even remember Billy. She's like, Billy who? Like, that says a lot about how her life has been going, that she's like, that I wonder if like the parts of her before this happened don't even really feel like her life.
They don't.
Like Billy is erased, like all that time when she was maybe a popular girl or whatever is moot.
They are.
Yeah.
It's gone. It's dissociated. I mean, and I realize I said DID without explaining it, so let me explain. And respond to some feedback sometimes that we sometimes say things without explaining it for people who may not have the same education as us. Is DID is dissociative identity disorder, which used to be called multiple personality disorder, which was a incredibly poor name for what the disorder entails. And what happens with that is that sometimes people encounter such horrible things that make them feel so profoundly trapped, stuck, unable to survive their reality or square with what happened, that they start having to form alternate parts of their identity that become more adaptive to a reality that they're living, that allow them to keep something dangerous in a secluded place in their consciousness. And it's something that Sarah essentially describes going through, and she's becoming whatever she's calling herself. And it is
Madame Serena,
right. But it would also be fitting that she wouldn't be able to leave that house.
Oh yeah, like I wouldn't be shocked if she was like agoraphobic, like if you could give her that diagnosis, if she would fit the criteria of that. At least social anxiety for sure.
She says she doesn't leave.
Yeah.
So, but that she would also be, I mean, socioeconomically stuck in a home that she inherited because she can't escape is one component of this. And especially, in the 90s where women at this point are only, 23 years into being able to have their own credit cards?
Ugh, yeah.
Something like that. But looking at how mentally she would also be likely adhered to the town, because the part of her that she's isolated away, that we're talking about how she would feel like we need to save Alan, she never did get to do that. And because her story couldn't be validated or real because it was so bonkers and outlandish that there was no validating of it, it still knows it was true.
Yeah.
And it can't be denied because it was true. That's the way our memory works. You can't lie to yourself. Not successfully, not completely. It's still there and you still fucking know. And you don't always have access to it, and it's not always a conscious process. So I don't want to say that people that have gaps in their memory, it's their fault. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that the survival messages you got from those moments will still present themselves, and they may seem like they don't attach to anything, but they do. It's in there somewhere. And for Sarah, she knows what she saw. and what she went through, and the guilt she would feel knowing she was unable to communicate that in a way that got Alan saved would be stuck in her 12-year-old self, where it got frozen in time. So it's a 12-year-old guilt self with all that egocentrism and none of the lessons learned from adulthood that thinks she's responsible because she played the game with him, that she wasn't able to save him or keep playing or do anything, that she ran away. And nobody ever saw these bats or anything else.
Yeah.
It's a psychological trap that it's so impossible that the only survival for her was to fracture that identity off, freeze it, and become something in someone else, because she was in this recurring terror where no one believed her and everyone made up a story that she knew wasn't true, that she either had to square with or face a worse reality herself. I keep holding on to the story that no one's believing and get sent away and be in even more danger, or deny your own reality. That was her choice. And then thinking about what happened to that town and everything that happened, like we still see the town looking okay, but context of the story is
it's a little dilapidated. It's gone down.
It's gone down because the major economic driver was the Parrish family, and after this event, everybody lost their jobs and had to do something else. The town transformed. That's a lot.
I think what's also interesting about the Sarah story, to kind of continue to bring it into like the real life version of this, is there are a lot of people who get told that what happened to them did not happen to them.
Yes.
And so I also think Sarah is a really accurate representation of someone who has been told over and over again by authority figures, you're wrong, you're crazy. You can't trust your reality. You can't trust your perception. You need to be on. I would bet money that she's on antipsychotics. When she calls her psychiatrist and she's like, I'm seeing things again, I think we need to up my dosage, I bet you she's on an antipsychotic.
Yeah.
You know, based on that seems like to be her central presentation.
Yes.
And so I think she looks like someone who is very timid, socially isolated, you know. How your confidence in yourself and your sense of self also doesn't develop when you are repeatedly told from a young age that you can't trust your own mind, especially in this situation where she could actually trust her own mind. Like, it would be different if she was having actual psychosis and maybe had some awareness of that, versus where she just has to kind of believe and trust that everyone else is telling her the truth, and she cannot trust herself. And that being like the central theme of her life from 12 on, I guess I can't trust myself. What that does to you, from like if anyone else has seen Inside Out 2, when like it's all about your belief system and how like things will go down to your belief system and form your identity. Like, that is an orb that goes down and fucks up the entire ecosystem of her belief system. And everything splinters from that. If I can't trust myself, how do I date? How do I make decisions? How do I figure out what I want to do for a career? How do I move out of my parents' house? How do I go to college? I can't trust myself. And I've worked with people because of trauma that will tell me, well, I can't make that decision. And we have to work together on trying to build trust in yourself. And that you can trust yourself, and that you aren't just inherently crazy, wrong, whatever, bad.
And those memories get stuck and they become formative. And it's what a lot of therapy, like some of the ones I'm certified in, entirely are designed to deal with, is how insidious those ideas become. And if you can reach the point where they formed and work on bringing that version of reality into present emotional awareness without the encoded danger, you can help heal people. But people think if you just tell someone to stop feeling a certain way and think about it without accessing where the memory is stored emotionally and they'll get better, it's missing the point. All learning, all information, everything that we take in has to be processed through the emotional side of our brain first. which means that if you're going to change any learning, it must be done through feeling, not thought. And Sarah gets a gift in this movie that Alan comes back and shows back up, and she gets an opportunity to re-engage from the point where she lost and has to make a decision to either continue hiding from the reality she's been hiding from herself, that she simultaneously knows she's hiding from herself, but has gotten so used to hiding from herself that it's painful to admit, nope, all this hiding you've been doing for all this time was actually the bullshit, not what people have been telling you for the past 26 years is bullshit. Mm-hmm. And she rejects that for a little bit when they're telling her, which was accurately done, hey, the only way out of this is we have to play this fucking game. And she's like, nope.
Well, because if one thing, it does seem like she's very bought into the idea of therapy. Like, she says, I've been going to therapy for years. She calls her psychiatrist right away. Like, the narrative she's bought into is that I am unwell. This isn't real. And so when that reality gets proven for her, which you think, like, logically, that would be a very positive experience for her. Like, if you're coming at this from a very pragmatic mindset, I could see, and like not a therapeutic mindset of being like, well, this is a win for her. Like, this thing that she's been telling everybody her whole life is real, gets proven finally. She should be feeling great. And what she actually presents as, which I think is more realistic, is, oh, I'm losing it. This is something bad is happening. I can't trust, like going back to I can't trust myself. And like in real life, how this more happens is families, right? Not necessarily like the whole town like we see here, but it's more that your family of origin will tell you a story about yourself and what happened and what didn't happen. And that forms the presentation Sarah has.
It certainly can. And to add to the layer of that, not only does she feel the impact of realizing that all those things she had hidden from herself were actually real. Okay. And she's, like you're saying, that would be a struggle by itself to realize, okay, so all that stuff that I had created safety for myself, that, okay, I misperceived that, I can't trust my brain, something's wrong with me, and that's why I have this experience. And Alan just ran away or something happened to him, but I'm not responsible for that. That was something my brain created because I'm not okay. Well, that's a safer truth than there's a fucking board game that can suck you into another dimension. Yep. Because you didn't think it would be dangerous to play a board game. Right.
I do think that one of the things that is the worst thing about trauma in a lot of ways is it taking away you being able to trust yourself. I think that's one of the symptoms that I feel like I experience a lot with clients, and how truly hard and tricky it is to shift those beliefs, like you brought up in Inside Out 2, because a part of having beliefs, a belief system, is that then your brain only looks for those things.
Yeah, confirmation bias.
And then you end up with a whole file that proves all of these awful things.
Yeah, like proves, like for her, like, oh, I'm bonkers.
Exactly. And so that's really the only other thing that I think I wanted to say just in general about Sarah's experience, is that not being able to trust yourself, it can really throw people for a loop, because again, the impact that you both talked about on the sense of self is so big. And just really, again, I think it's just one of the meanest parts about trauma, is it taking that ability away from someone. And then it being reinforced all over the place because of the experience that she had.
Should we take a break here and move on to Judy and Peter?
Yes, sir.
Yes, please.
All right.
Ugh, Judy. I love a kid like Judy. Judy was my favorite kind of kid. When I used to work exclusively with kids, I loved a Judy. Just like such a little defiant kid. And so kind of what I wanted to touch upon with Julie is they established very quickly, well, one thing I don't know if we clarified was Judy and Peter are siblings that move into the parish house in the 90s with their Aunt Nora because their parents died in a car accident. And they don't really say like how long ago that was. Do they say how long?
It was a year ago.
A year ago? Last year, maybe she says that? Last year
I don't know. So the only reason why I'm not sure is what the timing is because I do feel like they had to move.
Started a new school. And that usually that would happen after, like, not long after maybe the parents had died. So I don't know, because they couldn't have kept them out of school for a year, but they could have kept them at their own old school for a year and then came. I don't ever remember there being something said about how long it's been. It could definitely been a thing where their aunt was like, we'll make the end of the school year work just to not make a ton of changes at once.
Yeah.
And then we'll find a new house, a bigger house where I can fit us all, a huge house actually. And we'll start you in a new school in the fall, right?
Yeah. And it also, and I feel like it also feels like the sister inherited the house.
Nora?
Mm-mm.
No.
She bought it. I think the subtext is, I think she's intending to make this a bed and breakfast, is what I think.
Oh.
Because she talks about making like a reception area.
Oh, I totally missed
shit.
that.
You're right. Yeah, I do remember that part.
But
never took that in.
Anyway.
And yeah, I don't know if that's true. That's just the perception I got. So don't take that. But I got the feeling kind of like Forrest Gump, or maybe it's that I watched Forrest Gump recently, so this is playing in my head.
A boarding house situation.
Or if she actually said it. But like the impression I got was she was getting this big house not because she's super wealthy, but because that was going to be the means of income she had.
And honestly, that makes more sense because it's just her and 2 kids. Like, she's a single lady, it seems like, before like taking these kids on post her brother's death. Yeah, but so right away we get introduced to Judy as this kid who's pathologically lying, as we would say. She is telling not just like little lies, but she's making up like whole soap opera-esque personas that she tells adults around her. And probably kids too, but we only see her really interact with adults besides her brother.
Right. And you know that she's not had a lot of time to process this happened like the winter before or something. It's not a lot of time to get a balanced perspective, and we don't even know where they lived before this. I don't think that's ever covered, so we don't know how much change is happening. And then to only have a brother that interacts with you that you're responsible for, and an aunt that you know questionably.
Yeah, we don't know how well they know the aunt. Like there's a lot of unknowns about their life before the beginning of the movie. And even if we make an assumption, I think this is where maybe you're making the assumption, Ben, like that in the very end, the parents, it's Christmas time, and the parents say like, we're thinking of going on a ski trip. So if we're to take that as the same narrative, that they maybe died during the holidays.
Oh, maybe.
And then this aunt who maybe was involved in their life takes them in. Like, it's a big life adjustment for both of them, like for the aunt and these kids, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what I like about Judy, and a lot of kids I work with like her, is she's the kind of kid that I think would get labeled with a really unfeeling diagnosis. What I mean by that is like something like oppositional defiant disorder, maybe even conduct, depending on how intense her presentation is. We don't know. All we know is she tells a lot of lies in a way that seems very cavalier, and that she maybe got in trouble at school the very first day.
Yeah.
Like that, I even rewound that part when the aunt says, it's only been the first day of school and your principal's already called me and I have to go meet them tomorrow. But the aunt never says who it's about. So it could be about Peter and maybe the fact that he doesn't talk. It could be about Judy and maybe she's doing shit at school already that's causing a lot of disruption.
Yeah.
Or maybe even the principal's just being on top of it, and it's like we have these 2 new kids who are siblings whose parents tragically died and they're a little odd. It could be very innocuous like that. We have no clue.
That is true.
But I could see Judy being a kid that isn't taken seriously in the right way. Judy feels like a kid who would get in a lot of behavioral trouble.
Yes.
And because she isn't like weeping and very emotive in that way, that the adults would project a lot of their adult bullshit. And what I mean by that is the amount of times I've worked with kids who have like behavioral stuff like this, like lying, bullshitting, stealing, and the adults project all these adult sophisticated thinking onto them. This kid's so manipulative. This kid's trying to like get the best of me. This kid, like, as if little kids, like, as if, well, she's like probably 12, but as if younger kids are like plotting and scheming like soap opera villains because they're trying to fuck your world up. And we give them too much sophistication at that age. When I've worked with kids like Judy, the very first thing I thought when she was doing all that bananas lying in the beginning is she really needs attention. She really needs attention.
She absolutely needs attention. At minimum, she's getting diagnosed with adjustment disorder, and with conduct is absolutely a specifier in that.
Yeah.
And the thing that brings kids out of that, when they have an experience that causes them to have an adjustment that is so profoundly life-altering that they may have a lash-out reaction against this reality, is attention, is validation, is letting them feel seen and not trying to take away their experience so they're easier to manage, because that will cause them to react even more aggressively against whatever bullshit you're peddling to them. Because what you're not doing is making them feel seen and heard, and that they simultaneously have to just get over the fact that life isn't the same as it used to be, but also they need a lot of space for that to be okay, that it's not easy. And people, especially in the 90s, were just like, life sucks, get over it.
Yeah, for sure.
You're difficult for me.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I was thinking about too, knowing that we also hear their aunt describe her brother as a very loving and very involved parent.
Yes.
And so I feel like the other piece that would make a lot of sense with Judy, Ben, like you're saying, and Brittany, is that she's used to getting a lot of attention. She's used to getting a lot of love and support and caring. And now that the people who have given that to her are gone, and she just doesn't know how to get her needs met. In any other way. Go ahead.
And even just from like a lifestyle perspective, to go from two parents and what seems like a very conventional nuclear family, very involved parents, to an aunt that, even if they're closer-ish with, is a single woman, probably a business owner. She has that very type of like, she was a single business lady in the city, and then her brother and his wife died, and now she has to like drastically change her life and become a mother, pretty much, and figure out what school districts are and like shit like that, Like, I wouldn't be shocked if she lived in the city in New York, and she's moving them to New England, where like families are, and how that big adjustment, you're just not going to get the same kind of attention as you would with your parents, because it's a different dynamic. And it's also like not like their aunt chose to adopt them either, necessarily, like chose to adopt kids. It's also, she's probably also having to adjust to, now I have to be very present for these two kids that are going through a horrible trauma, and my life maybe was just about me. And that's a big shift in lifestyle for all of them. And so I'm sure, like you were saying, that Judy and Peter are left, and a lot of times just kind of just the two of them doing their own thing. Even from like a single mom perspective, now they have this aunt who's basically a single mom. Who knows, like, if their mom was a stay-at-home mom, their biological mom, and if they were someone was home when they got home. Like, she even asks, did you guys used to get picked up from school, or did you take the bus? I can drive you if you need to get driven, or do you want to take the bus? Like, that's how removed their aunt is from what their routine was like before her.
Speaking as someone who is a parent, the life change that happens when you get pregnant, let alone all the things that change when you raise the tiny humans, there's a fuck of a lot to deal with by itself, let alone having that suddenly come upon you without all of the transition period that goes with growing said human and seeing them develop and slowly adjusting to the ideas that, oh, you're tired now. Go through a pregnancy, you start to feel all of these changes coming, and you have time to adjust them. And
yeah, this is an overnight situation for Nora too.
Right. And without going through all of that pre-attachment that goes with having children and watching them grow and knowing they're a part of you, that's a hell of a lot to ask someone to do overnight. As well-intentioned as she is, she just isn't a parent and doesn't know how to be all of those things, and you can see it. They do a good job of representing, with showing how lost she feels.
I think if nothing else, they're going from being kids that might have had a mom waiting for them after school to like hear about their day and give them like a snack, like some bagel bites. Like they went from probably that to now they're basically either like latchkey kids, or they come home to an empty house and they just have to watch themselves for a few hours until their Aunt Nora comes home. So like that's a big life adjustment to feeling very seen and prioritized to then you are an afterthought now. And no matter how much Nora tries, it's a different vibe. Like the kids are something she's learning how to think about them first. Right? Like the fact that she didn't even really think about the transportation to schools thing until it was happening, and she was kind of like, that's what I mean. Like you can see she's trying, like she's clocking their reactions. Yeah. She's trying to, but it's definitely a work in progress. Like they are in the transitional stage of figuring out how to live together, and she's figuring out, Nora, like the questions that she never thought to think of or ask before. Like, oh fuck, like I guess, fuck, how were they getting to school before? Shit, like am I just assuming they know how to take a bus? Like, oh, and like, so you can see her do that work in the moment. And unfortunately, I think what I got from that scene is that Judy doesn't want to bother her. Like Judy's making it work. Judy's like, we're fine, we'll take the bus. I could see Judy saying that even if they've never taken the bus before.
Well, Judy's armor is also taking on...
Oh, she guarded his heel.
Of course she is. But also, she can play the role of caring for her brother in that like loving way of, I've been with you your whole life. And that's going to be something she can lean into for purpose finding, which is both healthy and unhealthy if not guided properly. It can be very healthy that she is that attached to Peter, that she looks out for him, and that's part of her role now to care for him. It can be very important and healing for both of them. But also, she needs somebody to step in and remind her that she still gets to be a kid and still has to be. And, you know, she's not going to trust Nora to necessarily guide her through that just yet. I'm sure Nora's well-intentioned and is trying very hard and will get there.
Oh, but I'm sure Judy clocked her immediately. Like, I like Aunt Nora. She's cool, but she's a friggin' mess. She doesn't know anything about being a mom. Like, I'm sure she clocked that from a million miles away when they were like, you're going to live with your Aunt Nora. She was like, okay. I
mean, everybody's been around. Kids figure out adults and they test constantly.
Which could also be part of it with the Judy thing. Because, like I said, like Judy is going through this moment where who she is in the center of other people's life has changed rapidly. She no longer has two parents that center her so intensely.
Correct.
Especially if they were as involved as, like you were saying, that Nora insinuates. Well, she outright says. Yeah. And so when kids do weird, out-loopy stuff, like, well, when I say weird, I mean things that don't make common sense, like lying, like stealing tchotchkes, like things that our adult brains are like, why would you make that? Why are you like causing problems? It gets people's attention. Like the reason why Judy tells those stories that are so intense is it immediately draws people in. And I think what's actually great about that is she's very creative. Like those stories she tells are very creative. They're very funny too. And we see right away with the real estate agent that it makes the adults give them all of her attention when she starts telling these wacky lies. And that's just it. Like when adults get all like in their head with me about like, what's going on with my kid that they tell these stories? Are they like this diagnosis, like over pathologizing it? I just think, what need are they trying to get met? everything that everybody does of all ages is trying to get a need met, whether we realize that or not. And so with Judy and kids like Judy, I always just think, well, what need are they trying to get met by acting that way? Also, telling those crazy lies keeps people from asking her about what's really going on, which is her parents. If she's it's also a distraction technique, right? Like if I tell these wacky stories, either they get so caught up in the story or they're so put off by my lying that they just go away. And I never really have to talk about what's actually happening, which is I've lost my fucking parents.
And Peter does the opposite by not talking.
Yeah. Well, and I think what is cute about their dynamic is when she goes to Peter in the very beginning when they're in bed and she goes to Peter's room, I think.
Yep.
And he does tell her, if you don't cut that out, the lying, you're going to go to a shrink. And I think that is, well, one, the term shrink is always so funny to me. That's such a 90s term.
It is.
Saying a shrink. And that he's not wrong, though. It makes me curious where he heard that. I wonder if people have said that stuff around him. Like, Judy, if you don't cut that out, I'm going to make you see a shrink. Because that's a very adult, like, where would he have heard that language?
I mean, they just grew up real quick.
Oh, yeah.
So it's likely they were exposed to quite a bit of that language. And
I'm curious, like, when I was saying I really like to work with kids like Judy, and you were kind of nodding your head, Hannah, what do you like about working with kids like Judy? I guess what came up for you with me saying that?
I think what I really like about working with kids like Judy is that what they really want is someone to be real with them.
Yes.
And that I really enjoy getting an experience with a young person who doesn't feel connected to anyone else, to be able to be someone who can be real with them, that they can, and not even like, oh, I want them to talk about this or they have to talk about this hard thing, but more of somebody who is going to see them for where they are and somebody who's going to be able to just tell them the truth. I think a lot of times what adults don't understand about kids in this position, kind of more of what you were saying, Brittany, is that they take it as kids have specific intentions.
Yes.
All of the time. And that there's always this intention behind every single, in a mean way.
A malicious intent.
In a malicious intent. That's a better way to say it. And I feel like I get these kids in my office and they just want to talk about how they're feeling. They want to
like it's the attention.
Exactly. Yeah. They need the attention. They want to be able to talk about whatever. And I think one of the things that I enjoy about working with these kids is that because most of my work is with adults. So when I get to work with a kid, it's so refreshing because there's so much, they can be real in a way that's different from an adult.
They can't help but be a certain level of honest all the time.
Exactly.
They don't know yet how to not be.
Yeah.
All the time.
And
yeah.
so,
depending on age. These two are a little past that, but man, kids tell the truth.
Well, Judy could definitely probably bullshit to a point and then give herself away.
Yeah.
Correct.
Because they're trying on these adults' coping defenses.
Yes.
But they don't have the sophistication yet to master them.
Yes. Exactly.
And so they give themselves away.
Yeah.
All the time.
Almost always.
Yeah. But Judy's like a kid that I think she actually probably, depending on how therapy was introduced to her, like I could see her being someone who might really thrive if she had a good match with a therapist, because to have a place where an adult, like you're saying, taking her seriously, listening to her, not getting on her case. Because also I wondered too with Nora, even Nora's trying to also logistically do so much problem solving, like moving, getting a good school for these kids, figuring out how to be a parent, yada yada. That even with all of that going on, there probably isn't a lot of room to be like sitting with those kids and just listening to them.
Yeah.
You know? And so I hate the fact that they like the shrink line, because it's very 90s to use seeing a therapist as a punishment.
Yeah.
and then that gets introduced as a punishment, it's going to feel like a punishment. And then what would really happen with a kid like Judy is she'd lock the fuck down, or she would tell such bombastic lies until the therapist like told Nora she's not ready for therapy because she's not being honest, or because she's acting out too much in therapy. Like, I don't know in the 90s how savvy maybe therapists were to clock someone like her.
Yeah.
And actually have the patience to work through it. I can't know, obviously, because I was still a kid in the 90s. But
Certainly more savvy than anybody Sarah would have gotten.
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Sarah probably got someone who was just like, snap out of it. Or over pathologizing her and like labeling her with all these neuroses and heavy-handed disorders and like prescribing friggin' like Haldol or something like that.
Certainly. And I think Judy has a chance that even the defiant behaviors that she got probably wouldn't have end up labeling her with ODD if anybody would have had the context of what happened to her.
I would hope so.
Yeah.
Because I think, depending on what happened at the school, if she's starting out the school year, day one, causing problems, that's how kids get labeled with ODD, is they have problems at school. I also wouldn't be shocked if Judy was, like, argumentative with teachers, you know what I mean? She's definitely kind of doing her own thing. And I would hope that teachers would take that into context, but unfortunately, in my experience working at partial hospital programs where kids were either being kicked out of school or going to my program, there's just not a lot of resources or education or just like mental space availability in the school system to give kids the benefit of the doubt with this kind of behavioral stuff. Unfortunately.
No, not always. But it's that's why it's important that people talk to parents, guardians, or whoever, and not just take what they see at face value, which we know sometimes they do, and becomes dangerous, especially when there's little resources, like in a small town in the middle of New England.
Yeah.
That's possible, but it's that's why a responsible practitioner needs to understand. You need to understand the whole story of what's going on here, because one thing could look like, you know, one presentation or diagnosis or another, but there's some pretty critical information, like parents died recently, moved, that would change the level of thought and the type of intervention that's appropriate. And helping Judy get that, and Peter, would be important and critical, because kid walking in having problems day one out of nowhere that nobody knows sure does stand the chance of getting labeled. But
that's a problem kid, yeah, for sure.
But also a little bit of a conversation, that principal calling, going like, so sup.
But I'm being so cynical right now, unfortunately, from experience. The amount of times I have to explain to adults how defiant behaviors are connected to situational factors and traumas. The amount of times I have to sit parents, teachers, everybody down and be like, these behaviors are connected to this thing that's happened. That's what I mean, like with the adult projection shit. Like, there's so many adults I've worked with who would be like, yeah, I know that horrible thing happened to them, but what does that have to do with the fact that why they're acting out so much? Or why are they stealing? Or why are they misbehaving? The amount of times I've worked with kids with trauma, and the number one goal their guardians had was, I need you to make them listen to me and mind me.
Oh my God.
That's what I mean. Like, and so I can just imagine a lot of like teachers in her school being like, what does lying have to do with their parents dying?
Because sometimes the school system gets up its own ass so profoundly that they forget that there are more important things than fucking tests, and it is frustrating and tragic, and makes therapists want to introduce slap therapy to the teachers, and like, let me explain to you real quick. Her parents died.
Yeah, but I people really struggle to connect those behaviors to trauma, or to understand how one causes the other. They really want to separate behaviors, like obedient behaviors, minding, from like the emotional inner life of a child.
Correct, which is
and so
bonkers.
Though I would hope that Judy would get that kind of advocating, I think the way that she, especially because she's presenting so chill, that she's smiling and she's telling these lies, that the whole movie she's pretty hee ha ha, which is a defense mechanism of itself, acting like she's cool as a goddamn cucumber, right? Yeah. But I think her presentation, that's also something a lot of parents and adults would say to me. But they're not crying, but she's not upset. She doesn't look depressed. She doesn't look like she's gone through anything. She's smiling when she does that.
The number of times I've had this conversation in supervision with my baby therapist that I just like, I'm like sitting with my head in my hands and going, I swear to God, if you do not, like, obviously I don't outwardly do this, but the internal version in my head is going like, if you explain to me one more time how her parents dying isn't trauma, I swear to God, I'm going to lose my shit.
Or like it isn't because they don't seem fucked by it emotionally.
Right. Like, I have
like
had
there's a specific presentation that they're supposed to have, and if they don't seem wrecked emotionally in a very specific ways, then
it's
they're
invalid.
Fine.
Right, then they're fine. Well, it can't. Well, it's not that then. You're like, I'm going to scream. I'm going to scream. I'm going to scream. And obviously, I am actually a very patient supervisor and try to guide people. But like, there's a part of me inside that's going like,
It's so loud.
How are you not getting this? You know, like,
Yeah.
I just explained to you, like, please tell me again how their parents dying isn't trauma.
Mm-hmm. So Judy's the kind of kid I like too, because once you do enough of that work with kids, I would feel like I'd clock her quickly.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, I got your number, girl.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, she's the kind of kid that falls in the cracks so easy because she, quote unquote, seems fine other than this bratty behavior, which might just be her being a brat.
Yep.
Regardless of her parents dying or not. So is there anything else we want to say about Judy before we move on to Peter? Okay. So let's take a break here. So Peter, I think, is really interesting to talk about because we've never talked about selective mutism on this podcast before. I don't think.
I don't believe so, ever.
And to be fully transparent, I've never worked with someone with selective mutism. I've worked like in a group where someone in the group had selective mutism, but I've never personally worked with someone with selective mutism. And what it is kind of exactly how it sounds, which is when a person, it's what it seems like is they just choose not to talk one day. Like they either were able to talk before or they have the physical capability to talk, but they seem to, quote unquote, be choosing not to. A lot of times with selective mutism, it is a trauma response. Some people say it is kind of a version of freeze, where you're just freezing and you're just not engaging and you're not speaking. So the reason why selective mutism came up for us is because in the beginning of the movie, even though she does tell a lot of lies, Judy does tell the realtor, the real estate agent, oh, Peter doesn't talk to anybody. He hasn't talked since our parents died. And then she goes into the whole tall tale she tells. But where it does seem like he actually does struggle with that is later when they are having that little one-on-one conversation in bed. She does say to him, if you don't start talking, they're going to make you go to a shrink. So it is, and he doesn't fight her on that. So it is clear that since their parents died, it seems like maybe the only person he talks to is Judy when it's just the two of them.
Seems probable. And it does struggle to talk. I'm not sure whether it's part of the presentation that's resurfacing for the character because something else bad just happened, or the fact that he's actually becoming a monkey.
Oh, yeah, that he talks, because he does talk much less once it's the four of them, or once he becomes
once
a
he
monkey.
becomes a monkey, he's talking less?
Is that what you're saying?
He struggles to, like, talk at all, and I don't know if that's because he's becoming a monkey.
Right.
Yes. You're
like
good
physically.
Like if he's starting to ooh-ah instead of talk.
Right, but he just like when he's having pain, like
his little tail.
The tail gets stuck, and he, it makes it clear to Alan that like something's wrong, but he's not talking. He's just kind of like whimpering and looking sad and weird. And he talks a lot less from the point that he rolls that dice and gets whatever, or he's cheating.
Yeah, he gets in trouble for cheating.
He gets in trouble for cheating by manipulating the dice. He was talking quite a bit up until that point that something else bad happened again. And it seemed like the movie's, kind of self-referencing that. Selective mutism hitting. But it's not entirely clear if that's just because he's a monkey now.
These are the kind of questions we ask on Popcorn Psychology.
Especially can really draw our attention to of like, what is the filmmakers doing here? It's more, how is it represented to us as therapists that's different than it would be represented to a director that's relevant through our lens, and struggling with figuring out, is this selective mutism or is it a metaphorical, allegorical representation is very important to understand when we're trying to figure out, is this symptoms presenting again? Or is it something happening? Because that's the same thing in reality you would look at is if somebody's not talking for a particular day, is something happening? Did something else happen in their life when this kid would talk in the office and all of a sudden isn't? Or do they have strep throat today? You need to kind of suss out, is it an external cause or is it an internal one? And it's very important to understand with something like selective mutism, which most certainly is a trauma response.
Yeah, I don't know if I've ever heard of someone having it just because they woke up one day and they're like, I'm going to stop talking.
Not that persists.
Yeah.
Kids will do that to you.
And I think also where it does feel accurate to me, but if this sounds wrong to anyone out there who's more trained in selective mutism, feel free to let me know, that he would still be talking to Judy. That he would, because that's probably the one person he feels the most safe with, and she's the most consistent, and he probably feels the less self-conscious about what he shares. And so when they're alone, him freely talking to her as if nothing's wrong, it does make sense to me.
Absolutely. And I haven't worked with anybody who has selective mutism either, but I do have someone that I work with who has a child who struggles with selective mutism. And it is very much that when they're alone, or it's whisper only, or it's like they come and whisper in your ear and then that's all that they can do.
Yeah.
With one person that they really trust. So it makes a lot of sense the way that Peter presents.
And yeah, I think a lot of ways it can feel like that trapped feeling of freeze, where your brain's going. People who have selective mutism, they're not like frozen. They're not catatonic. They're thinking. I think the effort to open your mouth and speak feels like a hill that's too tall to climb.
Yeah.
It can be that, and it can also be a way to control what emotions you experience, because it's not like it's unheard of for any of us to speak our way into feelings we did not know were there or were not intending to release. And the more you talk, the more you feel. And for there to be something as horrible as your parents suddenly dying in a car accident away from you that shatters your world, it makes sense that Peter doesn't even want a hint of that to be felt in his present conscious mind right now. He just is going through so much change that he's trying to control what he can, and the only thing that he can control, and this is usually a subconscious process, not deliberate, is his body can control not speaking.
Yeah, I don't feel like talking, and so I'm not gonna, and I don't want to. And also, it does make me curious if, with Peter and Judy, if we are seeing a exponential presentation of their natural dispositions, like if she was the chattier one and he was the quieter one. And I think when you have that dynamic, especially if the chattier one's older, I've had this growing up because I have a lot of siblings where if one sibling will speak a lot for the other sibling, they will just not talk as much because they don't have to. So I also wonder in this dynamic, because Judy is so verbose, if it has kind of allowed Peter to just be quiet, that he doesn't have to talk because Judy will talk for him, both maybe as her natural disposition, but also as his big sister. It's also a way for her to take care of him, to maybe that, I mean, I could even argue that, like, is that why she talks so much? Does that fill the space that Peter's not talking? And is it a protective thing for her to yammer on to fill up the space that Peter's not taking up. Because if you're distracted by her being such a little liar, then you're not noticing that Peter doesn't talk and Peter gets left alone.
And the inverse can be true too, that Peter's controlling a lot of attention
By not
because
talking.
but he doesn't respond, then more effort must be placed by the caregiver to communicate with him.
Yeah.
And then he is getting more attention than he would otherwise have gotten or be due, that might be, again, subconsciously filling a bit of a void of how much he feels he needs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a really challenging situation to work through. It's not my area of expertise either, but it can be something that really changes an entire dynamic, and it's important to be mindful of that. The Piano is an excellent film that represents this.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then that situation, her daughter does all the talking for her.
Mm-hmm.
It's always important to consider the sibling dynamic when it's a shared situation like this. You know, I don't think you could look at Peter or Judy in a vacuum with their presentation. Like, if both of these kids are doing stuff like this, that's why when you are a kid therapist, it's important to ask a lot of these questions. Like, what are the other siblings like? What's going on with them? How are they interacting with each other? Is this a dynamic that maybe was already happening? Like, was Peter always quieter, or did he become quiet? Was Judy always more like verbose and telling stories, or was she like a pretty honest kid that this is flipped on them? And I do think, what do you guys think about the fact that as soon as the Jumanji stuff starts happening, that for the remainder of the movie, besides the monkey question, that Peter is talking and engaging with Alan and Sarah as if nothing's wrong with him from a mutism standpoint?
I don't know if that's movie magic stuff,
Sure.
or
It snaps him out of it.
or he's so terrified that he has to communicate.
Or maybe like their survival.
Yeah, like the
His survival overtakes the freeze element of the not talking, or whatever advantages he gets out of not talking.
possibly. Yeah,
That one.
yeah. That's what I kind of think would happen, because I think about how it goes right into, then the kids are starting to get traumatized, and oh, by the way, what is the first way that they are with Alan is in a car, and he doesn't know how to drive, and their parents had just died in a car accident. Like, it would make a lot of sense that both of the kids would just be in survival mode after that. And I think they do a good job of portraying that.
Correct. I think they're understanding that they're in survival mode this entire movie. Mm-hmm. From the point that, fucking...
There's not a beat where they're hanging out having a sandwich. Like, they don't get any breaks. The closest thing they get to a break is when they're walking down the road, but then the cop finds them and they have the game. Like, they are diving into rivers and running from riflemen in supermarkets, and he almost gets crushed by a car.
There's a fucking lion in their house.
Yeah, like, there's no beats to stop. Like, there is no stopping points in this movie to relax, because it takes place in, like, over, 6 hours?
Yeah.
Right, which means like, we're not even remotely in the criteria of could even discuss trauma until afterwards. They're just trying to fucking survive, and they're relying on anything their body is interpreting through their senses that they need to do to survive this moment. That's the way we work. Everything is run through that survival lens first. Therefore, whatever is relevant to your survival is going to turn on or off right now, because that's what happens. And watching like him, that selective mutism, you guys are like right on it. Like, you're going to die if you don't talk.
Yeah.
It's real simple.
Yeah, exactly.
If you aren't communicating with the only people here interested in keeping you alive, who are not in fact tigers, alligators, bears, lions, whatever. Or no bears, sorry.
No bears.
No bears. But alligator, crocodiles, sorry. Crocodiles. Because they even cover that, don't they? They're like, oh no, it's not a crocodile.
Yeah.
You're like, really? It's crocodiles and elephants and rhinos and giant mosquitoes that are trying to puncture the roof of your LeBaron and whatever else is going on that's crazy with strange animals and diseases and suddenly turning into a monkey, probably better communicate with the only things not trying to kill you.
I do wonder they roll with the punches, both, I wrote that in my notes, both Judy and Peter, like roll with it, like the monkeys thing and the mosquitoes thing. They really roll with it as they're playing the game. Like, okay, the monkeys left the house. Let's keep on going. In a way that does feel very true to kids in some ways. And I wonder, too, they've dealt with something that's so out of their control and changed their whole lives. Like, even though all this stuff is very scary, it's like tangible problems that they just have to figure out how to solve.
And that's hardcore survival right now, because if you lose this game, we've already seen what happens. You know, we have Sarah as an example of what happens to you if you don't solve this game problem. And Alan. So the kids are presented with concrete information that makes letting that game just disappear not an acceptable outcome. Mm-hmm. So they have to save it. And they also are compelled to stay alive by our own biological drives. So that flexibility they're showing is inherent in kids and is something that they get a ton of credit for that adults lose. That kids can adapt and survive because they play that way. Kids rotate through games and activities in changing conditions in ways that adults just lose some flexibility to do. They lose the cognitive and adaptive flexibility to free play and move through things and just let the game change as it needs to. You watch kids playing, and this is how one therapy modality I studied for a while, psychodrama, was created by literally a psychiatrist watching children play and realizing, oh my God, they just rotate through. Whatever another kid says is like, okay, that's what we're doing now. And the whole game changes. A whole pack of kids may not even know each other. Go like, okay, and now we're flying in a spaceship and there's asteroids coming, and all the other kids that were maybe playing Jungle Cruise switched their mind. Okay, now there's asteroids. They just switch. And I think all of the kids demonstrating that ability throughout this film feels very realistic to me, that kids would just, because they play this way, that they audition reality this way. You go like, all right, fuck it, there's an alligator now. Like, I guess we better jump on the chandelier or get eaten.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, when you're a kid, like, you're still figuring out what's true about the world. So there's a version of this where, like, if Peter's like 9 or 10, you know what I mean? Or when you're littler, if you're just like, okay, well, now I know that there are board games where the things come to life. I didn't know that before, because when you're that little, you're that young, you're learning novel things all the time that yesterday you didn't know was a fact about the world. And so to adapt like that is, I think your brain, like you're saying, is more developmentally flexible because everything is new information. Whereas when you get older, you think you know everything about the world, because you do to a certain extent. And so it's harder to accept something so different than what you know. Whereas when you're a kid, everything's new. Everything is something you might not have known the day before. And so you're just more open to the possibility that something fantastic is true.
Especially when it is.
Yeah.
And they can just respond and adapt and adjust in ways that adults have the flexibility to do. Like, we see Alan is better at it than Sarah, because Alan knows it's true and has accepted this is not different than everyday suburban life. For Alan, this is every day. Yeah. All this stuff happening in another realm doesn't faze him at all. He's just responding. Boom. We're dealing with this. Sarah has quite a bit more lifting to do. However, there is a part of her that has been locked away that already knows the bullshit that can happen with Jumanji and knows it's real, so it's not as big a lift. But if we look at somebody like Carl, who is a police officer, and even in a small town, knows the truths about the world. He doesn't have that veil of innocence that other people do. He knows all the shit that actually happens, or how bad car accidents are, how bad domestics are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of things that lets people in small towns like to pretend like, that's not real. It happens to other people. He knows that shit's not true. And it's a much bigger lift for him to lock in and do anything. He behaves in all sorts of ways that are bananas and like lets stuff go. Like, there's children who are not at school, bro. And he's just like, oh shit, what happened to that car? Never mind, you guys are fine. Doesn't pick them up, doesn't put them in the car, doesn't take care of them and go, you guys are coming with me. Just like leaves because he's so flabbergasted by the fact that there's giant mosquitoes going around and causing bigger problems. He doesn't engage and know what to do until the rifleman is there, and then he drives his car into him.
Yeah. Whereas I think one of the best examples of this sort of flexible thinking is towards the end of the movie when Alan and Sarah are stuck in the floor and they're trying to figure out what to do. And Judy's like, I just have to keep playing. I'll just do this. I'll put the dice like that. You know, she is thinking very flexibly.
Yep.
Like she's not getting stuck in the barriers. She's like, let's just keep going. Like, and she figures out how to keep going. Whereas I think an adult would be like, how can Sarah possibly play? You know what I mean? How can we keep going? They're stuck. Like we have to figure this problem out first before we can move to the next one.
Yeah.
Whereas Judy is not trapped by that.
Correct. And that can be a thing that's really important to reintroduce into adult lives, is the ability to tap into that play and flexible thinking, and that everything doesn't have to be in these little boxes you've created. That there are ways to solve problems that aren't pass-fail. There are ways to solve things that can change with the situation, and it doesn't matter what the rules are. It doesn't matter what you've dealt with before or what you know how to do. Everything is the same, even if it's different. Like kids have access to metaphysical thinking that adults have to rediscover. And watching Sarah get re-exposed to that and have to accept that the absurd of this is true and she can adjust to it really helps propel her along this way. But you see some of the other adults really struggle to know what to do because they're so shocked by the ridiculousness of this whole premise that all of a sudden there's jungle animals loose and giant murderous mosquitoes and people are dying all around you, and everyone's trying like, what's happening? They're trying to figure out what it is. What do we do about it? As opposed to just enabling your ability to flexibly react to the situation and just do things. Trust your body. Go. Adults do not do that very well if they are not used to playing, and it's why things like role-playing games and improv classes can be so powerful for adults, because it forces them to be, you're in a situation now, you're going to react to it. Go.
Yeah, to get out of your head.
Get out of your head.
All right, so anything else before we move on to treatment?
Nope.
All right, let's take a break here. All right, so I'm going to keep it very short and sweet. So I'm going to pretend as if the corrective ending of this movie doesn't happen. Let's say I just have to start working with Judy as she's presented for the majority of the movie. Let's say the lying Judy in the very beginning. So when I say, like, I like working with kids like Judy, I can kind of explain, like, what would I do with a kid like Judy? So with a kid like Judy, I would just shoot the shit with her for a while.
Yep.
Because kids like her usually get sent to therapy because something bad has happened. So the guardians are like, the best course of action is sending her to therapy, regardless of whether she seems like she needs it or not. Like almost like preventative, reactive care. Or because she is causing a problem at school or driving her aunt bananas, so that she gets sent to therapy. And so a kid like her will test you. She probably would come into therapy and tell me a bunch of bullshit, you know, or she wouldn't tell me much at all. So she's a kid where even though there is something that has quote unquote capital H happened, I wouldn't talk to her about that for a while. Well, I would see what she comes in with. Like if she comes in like bullshitting me and telling me a story, I would be like, oh, okay. Like I would just listen. I'd kind of let her talk through all of her lies. Just like listen, talk, don't get caught up in the behavior. Don't call her out about lying. I would just listen and be like, wow, that's intense. And I wouldn't give her like a ton of that reactive, almost like punitive, scoldy adult energy. Because with a kid like her, if she's doing it for attention and protective factors, you want to reconfigure how she gets attention. So maybe I wouldn't give her a ton of attention when she tells me bullshit. But as soon as she starts telling me something honest, even if it's something small, I would give her a lot of attention. I would say like, oh, wow, that sounds like that math test sounded like it was really hard. And then if she goes on and on with some like superfluous story, I'd say like, oh, that's crazy. But I wouldn't like get caught. I wouldn't have the reaction like the real estate agent where you're like, what? Oh my, like so over the engaged, because I would want to loosen the connection between that behavior and getting attention, and instead make attention more of a neutral experience, skewing towards honesty, and I wouldn't punish her for lying in the therapy space. I think the farthest I might go with her is kind of asking her like, why do you think you're here? So I've some, like your aunt and some people from school have told me you have like a problem with lying. Like, what do you think about that? Because I do think kind of what you're saying earlier, Hannah, is kids like Judy love it when you talk to them with respect. And I'd say with her, I would kind of cut to the chase and be like, yo, like, I heard that you're here because people say you like lie a lot. What do you think about that? You think, are you? Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't come at it with like, so you're here because you've been lying and you need to cut it out. I would be more like curious, and I'd just be like, what's up with, like, I'd have a more like casual tone so that I wouldn't want her to feel like she's there as a punishment, or that she's going to get the same reaction from me as maybe she's gotten from every other adult. And I might even just say like, I know your parents just died. I want to just name that because that's something that's happened recently. Do you want to talk about that? We can talk about that here if you want to, but we don't have to. And just leave it. Like, she's a kid that I would play it very loose. And I wouldn't get heavy-handed with anything because I'd want it to feel like it's her space and she can do whatever she wants. But with kids like her that are testing, you just have to not get caught up in it. Don't get in power struggles with 12-year-olds. Don't get into this, like, reality testing. Like, that's not true because this, that, and the other. Who cares? The lie is not the point. You know what I mean? And me challenging the lie with the kid is just me, one, not teaching good communication skills or personal skills, and I'm arguing with a child. Or two, like, showing irritation in that way is also not healthy towards her. And what point is it serving other than making her feel ashamed? I think too, like, going back to what I was saying when I'd work with families where like, I want the kids to mind me. We get so hooked into this idea that the best thing a kid can be is obedient. And my job isn't to break a kid's spirit so that they're easier for all the adults around them to deal with. With her aunt, I would say, like, regardless of her behavior, one day a week, you guys still have a day where you do something fun together. Maybe not like blow it out of the water, because you don't want to be like acting like she can do whatever she wants and still have, like, I don't know, a water park on Saturday. But just be like, no matter what happens, you still give her one-on-one time that feels positive, that isn't conditional on her behavior. And I think that's really important too. Like, you can build in rewards that are conditional, but also I think having positive attention that's not attached to behavior is really, really important. And that you also don't take away attention that kids need because they're misbehaving. Because then you get stuck in that horrible cycle where they only get attention if they're negative, acting negatively, and then kids will go do that all day long. So that's kind of my thoughts about Judy.
Okay, I'll go next. Again, dismissing the corrected experience at the end of the film. I think that I would want to work with Sarah. And I think that's something that I would want to do. I mean, first, we would definitely have to just talk about decreasing her symptoms by increasing coping skills. So helping her learn grounding skills, helping her learn breathing exercises, helping her take good care of herself. Doing some of those pieces first is usually where I start. And then something else that I do to kind of help people start to trust themselves again is we find something that they can feel confident about, no matter what it is, no matter how small of a thing it is. And I have them do that so that they can sit in that feeling and experience the feeling of, I can trust myself that when I do this, this is the outcome I will get, to help kind of support the work that we'll have to do down the road of helping recover from the trauma that they experienced. So that's what I would want. That's where I would start with Sarah, and that's what I would want to do with Sarah.
Can you give an example of like a thing that would be confidence building? Like what specific, Like painting or like a hobby?
So like something creative would definitely be a place that I start. Doing something that they can complete, doing something they can feel confident about. So cooking is a really good example of that. Of being like, no matter what, you know how to make this meal. So let's make this meal, or let's have this thing that you can do once a day or once a week or whatever the fuck that can help you feel a little bit more connected to yourself and to the person that you want to be, or the person that you envision yourself to be. So that's kind of what I would do.
Cool.
As we could probably detect from when we were talking about Sarah earlier, Sarah would be the person I'd hone in on. She fits best into the modalities that I'm certified in and have spent a great deal of time trying to understand. It's exactly the kind of case that interests me clinically the most. The really complicated stories, the difficult experiences, the really hard mental blocks that we all have to uncover and slowly work through. Hannah's description of what she would do would be excellent and very important, and I think the only thing that I would want to do from my orientations to add to that with that kind of therapy, because Hannah's ideas are excellent and would be critical to even getting to that point, is recognizing how complex it is for people to confront their realities, and when it's something that happened to them is validated and they realize that their story was something that was real, for example, that they weren't sure about or were told that they remembered wrong, or all kinds of ways that it can get invalidated, is what people miss without some pretty significant clinical education is that because of dialectical thinking, because we can feel and think more than one thing at the same time, someone like Sarah would be struggling with immediately having to process that she told herself lies to survive, and what that means. How she would have to reckon with what she would likely interpret, or the part that she put in a box would come out of the box and like, see, bitch, I told you. And it would have some shit to say. And internally, she's going to be dealing with a lot of grief for what her life could have been. That's going to be from the mindset of a hopeful 12-year-old. And everything she wished and wanted and could have been, she'll be struggling with trying to replay that. And I see that with people all the time. They struggle to assess what their life would have been had something not happened. And that's really difficult. That's really hard work, and helping people kind of grieve for that loss is work that doesn't get done enough, in my opinion. And I think someone like Sarah would really need that. And we're going to have to grieve for what your 12-year-old self lost, because the ending of this movie is some horse shit. Mm-hmm. That, while I get it, tied a nice little pretty bow on everything.
Sure the fuck did.
And just gave everybody everything they could have ever wanted to do over, where everything goes well and nobody makes a bad decision, everybody fucks up, and we sing Jesus-y Christmas songs. Whoo, did the 90s shine through on that, huh? Mm-hmm. The sunshine shining out of everybody's butt. But the unrealistic expectations that creates are kind of the point I'm trying to make here, is that some part of her 12-year-old self would, want things to be like that, where you can do that. You can go back, and if you just knew then what you knew now, you could fix everything and stop death. And then stop these people who you met and became attached to from going through the pain that they went through, and that it's your fault that you haven't done that. Is some really powerful emotional work that has to be done to get the adult side of the brain that's survived everything that happened since 12 to 30, 38? Is that what they're at? 26 years, 12 to 38, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, I did math good. That's rare, folks. But looking at all the stuff that she's survived, she gets credit for, and that she can use and is adaptive to her survival, but it's they're kept in separate realities, and that 12-year-old self needs a place to kind of learn and reckon with that. And that's the kind of work that I really like to do and find a lot of value in, of helping people hit to the truth of those things that really need recognition to heal.
All right, so we'll take our last break here and be back with final thoughts. I love this movie. I'm a classic 90s kid. I love Jumanji. I'm the one who made sure that this episode was on our spreadsheet to do eventually, and I made sure that we stuck to it to do it today. So I will watch this movie again. It brings a little thrill to my little kid heart. Jumanji is me. I am Jumanji. If anyone hasn't seen the SNL skit where they talk about Jumanji, it's a pretty recent one. I kept thinking that when I was saying go into Jumanji, come out of Jumanji. So that's a little teaser for that SNL skit. It's
I don't want to be
funny.
Jumanji'd.
Yeah. But Jumanji is going into Jumanji, or is Jumanji coming out? It's basically the extent of that skit. So I would YouTube it if you haven't seen it already with, I think, Kristen Wiig.
Yep.
Anywho, I will watch this movie a bunch. I love this movie. And yeah. Hannah?
I also really enjoyed this movie. I definitely want to watch it again after talking about it. That sometimes happens on the podcast. And yeah, and I think it was well acted. I think everybody did a really great job. I love Robin Williams, and it was lovely to see him in this role. And yeah, I'll definitely watch this movie again.
I also still love this movie. I watch it with a bit of bewilderment of what in the fuck were we exposed to in the 90s that people thought was like just normal and natural. And watching, as you may have heard me mention recently, things like Beethoven and other things that came out around this time leaves you with a little bit of what the fuck compared to the things we've adjusted to now. But I still enjoy this movie. I enjoyed watching it with my daughter and seeing her wonderment at it, even though some of the stuff looks just so hokey now, especially
Yeah.
the spiders. Oh my God.
I would say mostly the quicksand floor.
The quicksand floor was a lot.
that was
But the spiders just look plastic. They don't even walk like spiders.
no, I think those were physical props that were
Yeah, I
Like-
think so too.
Brittany's favorite thing of like robots,
Oh, yeah. Animatronics.
but
Yeah.
not the scary kind. But this movie still holds up. The graphics and stuff don't. And I was this year old when I realized that Jumanji was a book that was written by Chris Van Allsburg, who also wrote the Polar Express.
Mm-hmm. And Zathura.
And I didn't realize that until I saw the credits, and I think I had the book. I read the book a bunch as a kid, and like I can see the art's the same. Like,
Yeah, it is.
it's so obvious, but wow, how different the book and the movie are.
Oh, yeah. It's very much a kid's book.
Yeah, very much
Like a
simpler.
kid's picture book, yeah.
It's got some menace to it, but the movie like really added some stuff that really I think only Robin could have pulled off, and I'm glad that we got to watch him and appreciate his work as an adult, because he meant so much to us all as kids. But watching the brilliance of that man act and the gravitas he carried still is like no one else, and I love to see that and love to share that with my daughter. So I think we'll hold on to this movie for a while.
Yeah. All right. So, unless you have been put into a game like Jumanji, please find us on all social media platforms. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and TikTok at Popcorn Psychology. You can also get in touch with us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. If you would like us to support us financially, we'd always appreciate that. You can either become a patron on Patreon, or you can buy some of our merch on tpublic.com. If you would like to support us for free, you can leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It's the best way for new viewers to reach us, and we really appreciate it. All right, everybody. So if you find a game buried in the ground, please don't just play it. Okay, bye. Also, why wouldn't they have burned the game or kept it in the house? As soon as they dumped it in the water, I go, what, so someone else can find it?
to make a sequel, probably. Maybe. But yeah, I agree.